What if the house you lived in held a secret older than time? What if there was a staircase that led nowhere, but whispered secrets louder than screams? In the cold belly of a forgotten town, hidden beneath layers of moss and rot, there's a staircase that shouldn't exist. It climbs, it creaks, it stops, and yet it echoes, with steps that have no feet, with stories that claw through the silence. One cursed bloodline, a mystery sealed behind stone, and a sound that never ever stops. Welcome to The Staircase That Ends at a Wall but Still Echoes Footsteps. This is not just a horror story. This is a legacy of terror passed down through blood, bone, and nightmares. Are you brave enough to climb? Before you do, subscribe and share if you love dark horror, generational curses, and stories that don't just haunt, they follow. Now tell us, have you ever heard footsteps when you knew you were alone? Drop your experience in the comments. We dare you. Year 1823, West Hallow, Maine. They say the house was built before the land was ever mapped, before the trees had names, before the roads had meaning. And in that house, rotting, crooked, and too stubborn to fall, stood a staircase that ended at a wall. It should have meant nothing, but it echoed. Jonathan Thorne had inherited the house through a letter written in dried ink and sealed with wax that smelled of cedar and ash. The letter came from an uncle he never knew, addressed with shaky hands and cryptic words. "You must take the house, Jonathan. It knows you now. Refuse it, and you'll still hear the steps. In dream, and soon, awake." He thought it was a joke, a final prank from a mad recluse. But when the lawyer handed him the rusted keys and whispered, "God help you," he began to wonder. The Thorne House stood 3 miles into the forest, hidden behind drapes of ivy and silence. It had no neighbors, no power, and no reason to still be standing. But it was there, and it waited. Jonathan arrived with a lantern, a flask, and the arrogance of youth. He was 25, fresh from a losing war and desperate to feel rooted. But the house wasn't a home. It was a carcass, cold, watching. The first night he heard it, step, 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 up the staircase that ended at a cracked plaster wall. No one else in the house, no animals, no wind, just the steps, slow, deliberate, and too real to be imagination. He stood at the base of the staircase with his lantern trembling in his grip. The light danced across warped wood and peeling wallpaper. He took a step up. Creak. He paused. The echo stopped. He took another. Creak. Then silence. Halfway up, he reached the wall. Nothing but dust and faded crimson paint. But behind the wall, his fingers felt warmth, like breath. He pressed his ear against it. Whispers. Fast. In a language that scraped against reason. Jonathan backed away. He stumbled down the steps. As he did, step, 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 behind him again. But he hadn't moved. That night he nailed boards across the staircase. Thick ones. He piled furniture against them and locked the parlor door. Then he drank, and drank more, until the bottle was empty and his eyes were heavy. But the steps never stopped. The next morning the boards were gone. Not shattered, not pried, gone. The furniture still in place, but the staircase open. Waiting. Jonathan left the house. He walked back to the town, West Hallow, and demanded answers. Most turned away when he spoke of the house. But an old librarian, Miss Edith Kerr, pulled him aside and whispered. "The Thorne staircase," she said, voice brittle with age. "It's been there since before records. Your family built that place, you know. Generations of silence. Some say it was never meant for humans. Others say something came through it, long ago, and never left." "Something came through?" Jonathan asked. Edith nodded, then leaned closer. "My grandmother said if you stay long enough, the house begins to know your name. And then the footsteps become voices. Then the voices become you." He left, heart hammering in his ribs, mind spinning. Back in the house, the staircase loomed. That night, Jonathan woke to cold air. His bedroom door had opened. Beyond it, in the parlor. Step, step, step. He grabbed his lantern. This time he didn't just listen, he climbed. 1 step, 2, 10. At the top, he pressed his hands against the wall. This time, the paint was gone, just raw wood. He pressed harder. It gave. He staggered as the wall cracked inward, revealing a narrow passage, suffocatingly tight, descending, not climbing, a staircase that led down, hidden behind one that went up. The echo, it wasn't coming from the top. It was coming through. Lantern in hand, he descended. The air smelled of copper and mildew. The steps wept with each footfall. The further he went, the louder the voices. Not whispers anymore. Screams, pleading, laughing, and names. His name. Jonathan! Jonathan! Welcome back! He dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed everything. He reached the bottom, or he thought he did. It was pitch black. A room stretched before him. He could feel the edges. Wood turned to stone, and in the center, a chair, a mirror, and a pile of shoes. Each pair aged, worn, children's boots, women's heels, men's leather soles, generations. He turned to run, but the staircase was gone. Behind him, in the mirror, he saw the staircase again, still there, leading up. But he wasn't in the mirror. Someone else was. Someone who looked like him but wasn't. Someone smiling. The footsteps began again. Only this time, they were running. Year 1857, West Hallow, Maine. No one ever found Jonathan Thorne. Some say he vanished into the woods, lost in drink and madness. Others whispered darker things. Things about the house with the staircase that ended at a wall, yet still echoed footsteps. The town grew quieter about it. Folk stopped taking the forest path. And the house? It stood, untouched, waiting. Until Elias Caldwell arrived. He was no kin of the Thornes, not by blood. Elias was a traveler, a man with a hollow past and a strange curiosity for places that made others shiver. He'd heard rumors at a tavern 4 towns over about a house in West Hallow that ate the ones who lived there. That was enough for him. He found it easily. The trees bent away from its path like they wanted no part of it. The air was wrong, wet with whispers, though no one spoke. The windows black as grave soil watched him. Elias smiled. He stepped inside. Dust lay like snowfall across the floor. The furniture had rotted, the paper peeled. But the staircase, that staircase, was pristine. Clean wood, no dust. And still, the soft step, step, step from nowhere. He laughed. "You're not very good at hiding," he said aloud. "Come on, ghost. Show me what you got." The air shifted. From behind him, the front door slammed. Locked. He was alone. Or not. He made camp in the parlor that night, right beside the staircase. Laid out a bedroll, lit a lantern, kept a journal. The echo came every half hour, like clockwork. From the top of the staircase to the bottom. Always 3 steps. Then silence. Elias tried it himself. Walked the steps. 10 in total. Flat wall at the end. He tapped the wall. Solid. Knocked. Nothing. He carved an X into the final step, just to prove something. That night, he dreamed of a hallway with no ceiling and mouths that opened in the walls. They all screamed his name. But when he woke, he couldn't remember what his name was. The journal beside him? Blank. He ran to the mirror in the hallway. His face stared back, but it didn't smile like he did. It waited. Elias shook it off. Tricks of the mind. But when he tried to say his name aloud, it came out wrong. I am L. His throat seized. His voice? Gone. Like his name had been pulled out of him and swallowed. The stairs creaked again. He turned. At the top stood a man. Or what once was a man. Skin pulled thin, eyes white and leaking. It didn't move. It only stood, head tilted slightly like it was listening. Waiting. Elias took a step forward. The figure took one down. He backed away. It followed. He turned and ran into the kitchen, slamming the door. Silence. He held his breath. Counted to 30. Opened the door again. The staircase was empty. But on the wall beside it, carved deep into the wood, were words. "You called it by coming here." Now it wears your voice. Elias didn't sleep. He searched the house, room by room, scratching his name into the walls, hoping to remember. He found strange things. A doll nailed to the ceiling in the upstairs hall, still warm. A Bible soaked in ink where all mentions of God had been burned away. A painting of a faceless family, with a mirror glued in where the faces should be. His reflection showed a twisted version of himself, one eye gouged, one hand bloated and gray. He smashed the mirror. The echo returned, louder now, like running. He sprinted to the staircase. The figure was back, closer, now on the third step. It didn't move like a man. It twitched, jerked, bent backward on limbs that shouldn't bend. Elias lit a match and threw it at the figure. It vanished. He tried to leave the house that night. The door was open. He stepped out and found himself back in the parlor. Again and again. Each time he opened the front door, he stepped back inside from the kitchen. The house had bent around him. He roared, threw a chair against the wall. It bounced and split. Something behind the wall laughed. Not a voice. Something deeper. A sound like weeping being torn apart. And then came the voice. His own voice. From the staircase. You shouldn't have come here, Elias. You've seen too much. Now you belong to it. He turned slowly and saw himself standing on the staircase. Same face, same clothes, but the skin too tight, the eyes black, the smile unending. The copy walked up the steps backward into the wall and disappeared. Elias followed, step by step, upper. This time the wall was open. Behind it, the hidden passage descended, just as before. He went down. Lantern light flickered. The room at the bottom hadn't changed much. Shoes, mirror, chair, but now a painting hung above the mirror. A family portrait, Jonathan Thorne, and beside him, Elias. He screamed, but no sound came. The reflection in the mirror no longer moved when he did. It just stared, blinked once, and smiled. Elias tried to leave the room, but a staircase now rose in front of him. Not the one he came down, a new one, made of bone, slippery with blood. And from above, the footsteps began again. But they were not alone. Behind the echo of steps came laughter, and the sound of hundreds of fingernails scraping on stone. And beneath it all, his own voice, saying words he didn't remember knowing. We are all just echoes now. Year 1882. West Hallow, Maine. West Hallow had grown quieter over the years, as if the very town itself was trying to distance itself from the haunted echoes that lived in the Thorne House. The land itself seemed reluctant to speak of it anymore. But the house was always there, watching, waiting. For years, no one dared go near it. The local children had been warned from a young age never to venture into the woods, the parents' voices shaking with the kind of urgency only fear could provoke. But that was before Sarah Greer arrived in West Hallow. Sarah was a widow in her late 30s, seeking solace in a town known for its isolation. A brief letter from a distant cousin, her only relative left, had led her here. The letter spoke of a small cottage by the edge of town, tucked among the pines. It was hers if she wished, a modest inheritance. With no family left to mourn, and the city's noise too much for her to bear, she took the offer without a second thought. She would make a new life in this forgotten place. But it was the second night that she first heard the footsteps. At first it was just a sound, a distant creak. Sarah, a practical woman who didn't believe in much beyond the tangible, ignored it. But as night grew darker, the sound became sharper, closer, the slow rhythm of footsteps ascending the stairs in her own home. She had already been warned about the Thorne House. Her cousin had spoken of it in passing, as one might mention an old tale long since abandoned. They say it's cursed, her cousin had told her once. That staircase, you know, the one that ends at a wall. It never stops, they say. The steps, they just keep coming. You hear them, you feel them. Sarah didn't believe it, but now lying in bed under the thin cover of her own sheets, she wasn't so sure. The echo was persistent, unearthly, and then it stopped. She waited, the silence swallowing the house whole. Step, step, step. No more hesitation. The footsteps were louder now. They didn't just come from the stairs. They seemed to come from all around her, crawling up the walls, the ceiling. They moved like whispers of the past, thin and insidious. Sarah stood, her heart thudding in her chest. She was not a woman to panic, but this was something else. Her feet carried her into the hallway, drawn towards a sound as if something invisible beckoned her. The stairs. At the base of the staircase, she stood for a long moment. The air was frigid. A low, unsettling hum vibrated in the walls. She could smell the old wood, the damp mildew that had clung to the house for decades. And she could hear it, the steady step, step, step climbing from nowhere. With her hand on the railing, Sarah's pulse quickened. She had to know. She had to see for herself what haunted this house. Slowly she climbed. The staircase was deceptively normal, creaking with every step, as stairs in old houses are wont to do. But the more she ascended, the thicker the air became, the scent of decay. The cold seeped into her bones. The echo. It was unmistakable now. The footsteps ahead of her were too clear, too precise. There was someone or something up there, leading her to the top. She reached the top step. Nothing. A wall, just as the legend said. A faded wall covered in grime, with the remnants of what might have once been wallpaper. Old cracks ran across the surface, as though the house was holding its breath. Sarah's fingers hovered over the cracked plaster. She pressed against it. It was solid, unyielding. But as her fingers lingered, the sound of footsteps came again, not from above, but from within the wall. Tap, tap, tap. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected the usual silence after the echo, but this was different. This felt alive. A voice rasped in the dark. "I am coming?" She stepped back, heart racing. The air grew colder, heavier. She had heard enough ghost stories in her time to know one thing. When the dead wanted something, they took it. Sarah turned and ran down the stairs, her breath quick and shallow. The floorboards beneath her feet seemed to tremble as though the house itself was waking, stretching, preparing for something terrible. She reached the bottom, and there it was. The thing that wasn't there before. A door. She hadn't noticed it. Not in all the years she had walked this floor. It was half hidden in the corner, framed by thick, rotting curtains, blackened with age. Her hand reached out without thinking. The door swung open with a soft squeal of rusted hinges. Inside was nothing but darkness. Thick, oppressive darkness that swallowed the light from her lantern hole. But she had already crossed the threshold before she could stop herself. Behind her, the door slammed shut. She turned, but the darkness seemed to stretch further into the room until it felt like an endless void. And then, a voice, one she recognized, her own. "Sarah, why have you come?" Her heart stopped in her chest. She staggered back, panic rising in her throat. The voice was not just her own. It was the one that had haunted the walls of the house, the one that had never belonged to any of its former inhabitants. And then the footsteps began again, but they weren't echoing anymore. They were right behind her. They were closing in. Her pulse raced as she turned back toward the door. It wasn't there. The room had shifted. The walls closed in around her, and in the growing dark, a figure loomed. The same figure from before. The man who wasn't a man. Its form stretched inhumanly, tall and gaunt, its face smeared with shadows. But its eyes gleamed white and empty. They saw her. It grinned slowly, revealing teeth too sharp for any human mouth. The steps echoed now, deafening. "You wanted to know," it hissed, its voice both a whisper and a roar. Sarah reached out for something, anything to defend herself, but the air was thick, solid. The figure moved closer, and she heard the whisper again. Not from the figure, but from the very walls themselves. "Now you belong to the house." The footsteps returned, but this time they were not alone. There were more of them, hundreds, thousands, all marching in unison, and with them, the sound of 1,000 voices, all crying out her name. Year 1900, West Hallow, Maine. By the turn of the century, West Hallow had begun to fade. The people, once stubborn in their resistance to leave, had dwindled. What remained was a crumbling shadow of what had once been a thriving town. Many spoke of the Thorne House in whispers, always at night, always with fear. It was not the only strange house in the area, but it was the one with the reputation, the one that had swallowed those who dared to live in it. And yet, for all the stories, for all the warnings passed down through the generations, there was still the occasional fool who tried to conquer it. Charles Blake was one such fool. He had grown up hearing the hushed rumors in town, grown up with the stories of Jonathan, Thorne and Elias Caldwell, of the voices in the walls and the steps that echoed long after the people had gone. But Charles was a man of science. He scoffed at superstition. When he learned of the house's history, he saw it not as a home of ghosts, but as a puzzle, a strange anomaly that defied reason and physics. He wasn't afraid of ghosts. He was intrigued by them. When he arrived in West Hallow, he was met with stares, old, knowing eyes, faces that seemed to turn away when he passed. Still, he pressed on, for he had a purpose. His father had left him a journal, old, crumbling, and filled with notes about a strange phenomenon, a place where echoes were more than sound, a place where the past could be felt, walked through, even lived. His father had never found the house, but Charles would. The Thorne House, now forgotten and in ruin, called to him. He stood before the house on the first night, lantern in hand, staring at the silent steps that led to the door. The windows were dark, the air thick. The land had given up on this place long ago, and yet it persisted, refusing to fall into ruin entirely. It stood, ancient and defiant, like a monument to a long-lost history. Charles felt the pull. He could almost hear the whispers in the air. Almost, but not quite. He entered the house and surveyed the dim, dusty halls. Every corner reeked of age, of death, of something forgotten. And there at the end of the hall was the staircase that had haunted the town for years, standing there as if mocking all the rational minds that had come before. Ridiculous, Charles muttered to himself. But there was no denying the chill that ran through him as he stepped forward, placing his hand on the cold, rotting railing. The air grew heavier as he climbed. It was silent at first, the familiar creak of old wood underfoot, the musty scent of decay, the thrum of blood pounding in his ears. But as he reached the top step, it came, a sound, step, 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 and then silence. Charles froze. He had been prepared for this. He had read the accounts. The footsteps were just a trick of acoustics, a natural phenomenon caused by the peculiar architecture of the house. He knew this. He was ready. But as he looked at the wall at the top of the stairs, a chill ran through him. The wall that had been sealed for decades, maybe even centuries, seemed to breathe. The surface rippled, like something trying to escape. Something moving. He reached out, almost without thinking, pressing his fingers to the surface. The wall shuddered. A voice, a deep, hollow voice, ripped through the silence, curling around his ears. "Why are you here?" It was a voice he couldn't recognize, but somehow it felt like his own. The air grew colder. Charles took a step back, but it was too late. The wall split, cracking wide open like the mouth of a great beast. From the darkened space within, a hand reached out, a hand that was too long, too thin, with fingers that seemed to stretch and crawl in unnatural directions. The nails were black, jagged like claws. Before he could react, the hand seized his arm with a grip that sent a jolt of cold fear straight into his bones. He yanked, but the fingers dug in deeper, pulling him forward into the darkness of the passage that had appeared where there was no passage before. He screamed, but the house seemed to swallow the sound. The walls, slick with some strange moisture, pressed in around him as he was dragged deeper into the unseen space. The air was stifling, and the world around him seemed to distort, warp like a twisted dream. He felt weightless, as if he were sinking into a pit of shadows that stretched beyond the world he knew. And then, the footsteps. They echoed again, louder this time. Step, step, step. But this time, they weren't just echoes. They were alive. They were chasing him. Charles stumbled, trying to regain his footing as the walls seemed to push back at him, fighting against him. But as he took another step, the world spun. He fell and landed with a thud. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the passage. He was in a room, a vast cavernous space. The walls here were made of smooth stone, polished, as though they had been carved by hands long forgotten. The floor was cold, almost slick, and the air tasted of something metallic. A distant light flickered somewhere in the distance, casting strange, elongated shadows that danced around the room like phantoms. There was something in the room, a figure, a dark shape moving at the edges of the light. Its form seemed to flicker in and out of reality, like an apparition. But its eyes, those eyes, glowed with a strange, unsettling light. They were his eyes. Charles tried to scream, but his voice was lost. It seemed to vanish the moment it left his lips. The figure moved closer. The sound of footsteps, his footsteps, resonated all around him. Step, step, step. But they weren't his anymore. They belonged to something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting, buried in the shadows of the house. The figure stopped before him. It smiled. The smile was not kind. It was hollow, dark. "You are not the first to come here," it whispered, "and you will not be the last." And then it spoke a name, Charles Blake, his own name, twisted and writhing in the air, as though it had been plucked from the very fabric of time itself. The footsteps began again, now surrounding him, closing in from all directions. And in the distance, far behind, he heard a voice. His voice. "You cannot leave." The air grew suffocating, the room closing in tighter around him. His heart beat faster, desperation clawing at his chest. "You belong to the house now," the figure said, "and we are all part of it." Charles tried to move, to run, but it was useless. His feet were rooted to the spot. The footsteps were all around him, louder now, reverberating through his skull, his body, his very soul. And just as the darkness closed in, he realized the truth. The house had been waiting for him. For generations it had waited. The footsteps that echoed through the halls were not just sounds. They were memories, and he was now part of them. Year 1914, West Hallow, Maine. By 1914, the Thorne House was nothing more than a ghost story to the townsfolk of West Hallow. No one ventured near it anymore, and the tales of the footsteps and the disappearing people had grown into nothing but whispered superstitions, tales passed down in the dark corners of the town tavern. But for those who still remembered the house, it was something to fear, something that lurked at the edges of their consciousness. And yet, in the shadow of the house's haunted history, a new person arrived in West Hallow. Dr. Beatrice Moore, a young and ambitious psychologist from Boston. She had heard the rumors of the Thorne House, of course, but she had also heard of its power, the power of memory, the power of the mind, and she was determined to understand it, to study it. The town was small, quiet, and the people were friendly enough, if a little strange. They didn't speak much of the house, and Beatrice was content to keep it that way. For now, she had a purpose, and she wasn't easily deterred. She rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town, not far from the Thorne House. The people in town were hesitant to even tell her where it was, but she found it easily enough. She was drawn to it, the same way a moth is drawn to a flame. The first time she stood in front of the house, she felt an odd sense of familiarity, as though she had been here before, long ago. She dismissed it as nothing more than her overactive imagination, but the house, it called to her. Its dark windows stared down at her, and she could almost hear the echo of footsteps from behind the walls. The footsteps. There was something undeniable about the way they reverberated in her mind, a persistent rhythm she couldn't shake, something alive about them. She had spent years studying the power of memory in the mind, but nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the feeling of being watched, but she wasn't afraid, not yet. Dr. Moore made her way to the door, her heart beating faster with each step. The front door groaned as she pushed it open. The air inside was stale, the dust thick. It was as if the house had been untouched for years. But that wasn't true, was it? After all, Charles Blake had been here, hadn't he? She stepped into the foyer, her footsteps echoing loudly in the emptiness. And then she heard it. Step, step, step. The unmistakable sound of footsteps on the stairs. Beatrice's heart skipped a beat, but she held her ground. She had heard the rumors, yes, but she was a scientist, a rational person. She would find the source of the sound, the truth behind it. She wasn't going to let superstition stop her from getting answers. The footsteps continued, coming closer now, slowly but steadily. She turned her head, expecting to see someone, or something, at the top of the stairs. But there was nothing, just the same cold wall. Step, step, step. Closer now. But still, nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no one there. She knew that. And yet the footsteps were unmistakable. They were real. They were happening right now, right in front of her. With shaking hands, she reached out to touch the railing. The cold wood seemed to hum beneath her fingers. Something moved in the air. The house was alive. She could feel it, pulsing with a strange energy, as though the very walls were breathing. And then, a voice, a whisper that slid into her ear like a cold breeze. "You shouldn't have come." Her pulse raced. She spun around, but there was no one there. The voice was gone, swallowed by the silence. She stepped back, her mind racing. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't just an abandoned house. This was something more, something darker. The house? It remembered. She glanced at the staircase. The footsteps had stopped, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, watching. She had to go upstairs. She had to find out what was happening. Her steps were slow, hesitant, but she climbed the stairs anyway. The air seemed to grow colder as she ascended, and she could hear it now, the footsteps coming again, this time from above her, getting closer with each passing second. Step, step, step. At the top of the stairs, she paused. The landing was empty, no sign of anyone, but the door at the far end of the hallway was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness peered out from the crack. It was the only room in the house she hadn't explored yet. She moved toward it, each step louder than the last, the footsteps following her. The door creaked open when she pushed it, revealing a small, dimly lit room. There was an old chair in the center, its cushions torn and worn. A mirror hung on the far wall, cracked down the middle, and a strange, unsettling feeling washed over her as she stepped inside. The room was wrong. It was as if it had been frozen in time. The air was thick with dust, but there was something else too, a presence, a feeling that something had once lived here, something that still lingered. She turned to the mirror. It was cracked, but through the shattered glass, she could see a reflection, a face, her own face, but not quite. The eyes in the reflection were wrong. They were dark, hollow, like empty sockets. The mouth was twisted in a silent scream, stretched unnaturally wide. Step, step. The footsteps were no longer coming from behind her. They were coming from inside the room, from the mirror. She turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure. It was a man. No, a shadow of a man. His form was indistinct, his features blurred, but his eyes gleamed white in the dim light. And then it spoke. Its voice was the same as hers, but distorted, twisted. "You shouldn't have come, Beatrice. You belong to the house now." The figure stepped forward, its presence suffocating, and the room seemed to close in around her. The footsteps grew louder, and the whispers, the voices, her voice, grew louder too. "You are part of it, just like all the others." Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to scream, but no sound came. The room, the house, the footsteps, they all became one, drowning her in a tide of darkness. And then, with a sudden, shocking clarity, she realized the truth. The house was not haunted by spirits. It was alive. It had a mind of its own, a consciousness that fed on the echoes of those who had come before, those who had been consumed by it. She was just another name on the wall, and it was only a matter of time before the house came for her. Year 1951, West Hallow, Maine. By the mid-20th century, West Hallow was barely a town, just crumbling buildings and grave markers. And the roads leading into it had all but been consumed by forest. Most maps stopped including it altogether. But not everyone had forgotten. Some people hunted forgotten places. Jasper Merrick was one of them. He called himself an archivist, an old soul in a young man's body, with a fascination for places time had chewed up and spit out. He traveled with a suitcase full of aged journals, maps with faded ink, Polaroid cameras, and a voice recorder always hanging from his neck. He had traced the legend of the Thorne House through folklore, microfiche newspapers, and brittle letters found in abandoned libraries. The story that drew him was like a black thread running through generations, always ending in the same image. A staircase that led to a wall, and still echoed footsteps. Jasper was meticulous. He arrived in West Hallow with no intention of confronting ghosts. He only wanted the story to document what had happened to Jonathan Thorne, Elias Caldwell, Charles Blake, and the elusive Dr. Beatrice Moore. Their names had appeared again and again in the margins of yellowed papers, each time closer to madness. But some doors are only meant to be opened by the obsessed. He found the Thorne House buried in fog and ivy. Its structure impossibly was intact despite decades of abandonment. The roof sagged, the porch groaned, but it stood defying rot, fire, time. The air around it had a static charge, like the hum before a lightning strike. Jasper's boots crunched the gravel as he stepped to the porch. The door opened before he touched it. Not blew open, opened. He stood there, heart thudding in his chest, recorder already run. "This is Jasper Merrick," he whispered into the mic. "I am inside the Thorne House. Time unknown. Date, October 28th, 1951. There are no visible signs of recent human habitation, but I believe the house knew I was coming. Inside, time stood still, furniture coated in dust, drapes like spider webs, and the staircase, just as described, loomed in the center hall like a shrine. It rose to the upper level, where it met a seamless wall. Jasper approached it slowly, each step measured, heart pounding. The footsteps started before he reached the first riser. Step, 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 not his. They came from above, pacing the hallway that shouldn't exist. He stopped. The tape recorder hissed. Then the footsteps stopped. He whispered into the mic, "I am not alone." But he was. He could feel it. That was when he noticed something new. A small cabinet door set into the wall beside the staircase, unmarked, previously unmentioned in any of his sources. He crouched and pulled it open. Inside was a journal. Its cover was made of leather so dry it cracked when he lifted it. Written on the inside, Dr. Beatrice Moore. His breath caught. He flipped through pages, many soaked with water, others stained with something darker. But the writing was meticulous. Beatrice had documented everything. The footsteps, the whispers, the mirror that didn't reflect right, the shadow figure with her voice. The final entry chilled him. The house learns your voice, then it learns your name, and then it remembers you. It does not forget. I do not know how long I've been here. The clocks have stopped. I do not know where I am, but I know the footsteps are mine now. They echo when I sleep. Jasper swallowed hard. The air grew cold. He turned toward the stairs and began to climb. Step, step, they returned, louder this time, matching his pace exactly. He reached the top, stood before the wall. It pulsed faintly, as though something behind it was breathing. He reached out, hesitated, then placed his palm against the wall. It was warm. A voice buzzed in his head, like a swarm of wasps, under his skull. Jasper Merrick. His knees nearly buckled. The voice knew him. You seek the truth. The ledger. The names. He staggered back. Who are you? He rasped. The wall split. Not physically. His eyes still saw plaster, but his mind saw it. A dark corridor, lined with candlelight. Figures flickered at the edges, just out of focus. And in the center, a desk. Upon it, a massive book. The ledger. Names filled its pages, each written in black ink, each surrounded by faint whispers. He could hear them, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Jonathan Thorne, Elias Caldwell, Charles Blake, Beatrice Moore.
The ink pulsed like veins under skin. A space awaited the next name. Jasper Merrick. He turned to flee, but the staircase was gone. The house had folded inward like a trick of mirrors. Doors leading to dead ends. Corridors coiling like a snake. His recorder crackled. Still running. "You were always coming here, Jasper." A voice, his own voice, emerged from behind him. "You've been here before." He ran. He burst through a hallway, down stairs that bent and twisted into impossible angles. The walls whispered his name, with every step. "Jasper, Jasper, Jasper, Jasper." His voice on the recorder looped without touching the rewind button. He smashed the recorder against the floor. It didn't stop. In a final desperate act, he ducked into a room, maybe the library, and slammed the door. Shelves stretched endlessly upward, books swaying as if caught in windless breath. He clutched Beatrice's journal, the only proof, the only anchor he had. Then silence, until step, step, step. They entered the room with him. He turned, wild-eyed, and there she was, Beatrice Moore, or what was left of her. Her face was pale, bloodless, eyes black as coal. She did not walk. She drifted. Her voice when she spoke was like wind through broken windows. "You can leave, but only if you take our place." She opened her mouth. Inside was the staircase. Jasper screamed, and the house echoed.
Year 2025, West Hallow, Maine. There are places the world forgets for a reason. Deep in the woods of Maine, where no GPS signal dares go and maps end in smudged ink, West Hallow is little more than a whispered memory, a name spoken only by those who seek things they shouldn't. Eleanor Voss didn't believe in ghost stories. She was a seasoned investigative journalist for The Unseen Truth, an underground publication known for its obsession with unexplained phenomena. But Eleanor didn't chase shadows for thrill. She wanted the story behind the story. She wanted answers. And she had come to West Hallow in search of Jasper Merrick. He had vanished in 1951, last seen traveling north with a single destination marked in his leather-bound notebook, the Thorne House. Eleanor had studied his recordings, his writings, and most importantly, the one thing that shouldn't exist but did, a tattered journal marked Dr. Beatrice Moore. It had arrived anonymously at her apartment 6 months ago. No return address, just a note inside. "The house still remembers, and now, it remembers you." She thought it was a hoax until the dreams began. The same house, the same staircase, and always, the same sound, step, step, step. By the time she arrived in West Hallow, it was early fall. The leaves bled red across the forest floor, and the sky hung low like it was trying to bury the past. She found the house with little effort, as if the forest wanted her to find it. It stood unchanged, frozen in time, though decades had passed. Vines clung to its bones, but no wind dared disturb it. Her breath fogged the air. The forest was silent, too silent. Eleanor stood on the porch with her flashlight and recorder. Eleanor Voss, October 23, 2025. Thorne House. She hesitated, her pulse like thunder in her ears. "I don't believe in ghosts." The door opened. No creak, no resistance. It welcomed her. The air inside was thick, heavy, like stepping underwater. Dust motes hung in slants of light like suspended ash. She stepped carefully. Her boots echoed, and already the rhythm began to change. She wasn't walking alone. Step, step, step. She paused. The flashlight flickered. Then again, step, step, step. Up the stairs, toward the wall. The infamous staircase loomed before her just as described in Jasper's note. It ended in a blank wall, and yet that sound echoed from it, as though someone were endlessly walking a hallway that didn't exist. She approached slowly, whispering into her recorder. "I am standing at the staircase. It ends at a wall just as described. And yet, I hear the footsteps." Her hand brushed the rail, cold, electric, like touching a memory frozen in time. She climbed, and with every step, the air grew thicker. Something breathed in the shadow. She reached the top and stood before the wall, her light illuminating cracked wallpaper and faint markings. Names, hundreds of names. Her light caught one freshly etched, Jasper Merrick. Below it, Beatrice Moore. And then, Eleanor Voss. Her blood turned to ice. She reached for the wall instinctively, foolishly, and it gave way.
Not physically, no, it opened in her mind, and she saw it. The corridor, endless, lit by flickering lamps, and doors on either side. Dozens, hundreds, behind each door a story, a life, a scream. She stepped forward and the wall devoured her. She was no longer in the house. She was beneath it. The corridor stretched like a spine beneath the world. The footsteps now deafening. They came from every direction, layered, chaotic. She ran, heart pounding like a drumbeat. The walls were made of whispers, voices clawing at her name, at her thoughts, pulling them apart. Eleanor, 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 Eleanor. She flung open a door. Inside, a room she'd never seen, but it had her face on the wall. Hundreds of Polaroids, each one capturing her in a moment she never remembered living. Crying in her car, walking down an empty street, standing on a rooftop. The photographs moved, blinking. She backed out. Another door, a library, shelves stretching into blackness, and in the center, the ledger. The names pulsed, and the newest one was hers. "You can leave," a voice whispered from the dark. She turned. There stood Jasper Merrick, but older, decayed, hollow-eyed. Beside him, Beatrice Moore, her mouth stitched shut. "You can leave," Jasper repeated, "but only if someone else takes your place." Eleanor stared, breathless. "What are you?" He smiled, and his teeth were shadows. "We're the echo, and now, so are you." She ran, room after room, until she burst through a final door, and was back in the house. The front door stood open. Moonlight poured in. She fled into the night, screaming. Behind her, the house did not move. It didn't need to. It had her name, and it would remember. 2 weeks later, a real estate agent in Portland received a mysterious envelope. Inside, a recording. Eleanor's voice. "I don't believe in ghosts, but they believe in us. And the house, it doesn't want to be forgotten. It won't let us forget." The footsteps, they're not an echo of the past. They're a call. The tape ends with footsteps. Step, 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 then silent. Then, another voice. Yours, calling your name. And remember, don't answer if the house calls, because the wall, it only looks like the end, but the footsteps never stop.